Board games, it's what we're talking about. Board games, I'm not gonna shout. I am starting off this morning with a little bit of singing. And here in front of you all is the person known as Alan Paull. Alan is going to talk about some war games. Alan is going to tell us their names. Alan's going to tell us about the history of war games in some objects, hopefully not too slowly. Board games, I'm not gonna shout. Board games, that's what we're talking about. Hello!
That's me pointing at bears.
You need to point the other way because...
Yeah, no, forgetting it's the other way. This is pointing at my wife who's sitting alongside me, but it's really Bears, honest. Hello, Bears. Hello, everybody.
Hello, and hello, Xate. It is lovely to see you. I was going to say fashionably, kind of kempt, but I am Bez. It is approximately brunch time, and we are having a bit of a blether. And today, it is going to be Alan Paull talking about the history of wargaming, part 2. So yes, that is what we're all about today. We started off 2 weeks ago. You showed us a bunch of things. You're able to show us the actual things. You've got them on the table
here.
I
have the actual things behind me over here. Yes,
because we were talking about
my coffee pot, which is quite important, actually. Yes, because it is breakfast. Although you've changed it to brunch, Bears. Does this mean you're actually getting up earlier now, or is this?
No, basically, I was thinking that for Xate, we'll cook for board games. Yeah, exactly.
Brunch and Will. Thanks, Will. Great.
So their name is Xate.
Or is that Will Cook?
So Will Cook for Board Games is like their channel, the YouTube channel, and blog, but it's really confusing for everyone. You're definitely not the first person who's made that mistake. Anyway, for people who are in Europe, it is approximately brunch time. And as always, we do start off. Let's move through it a little bit quickly because I'm sure that we will have lots of rambling as we get to the main topic, knowing gospel. It starts off with a brilliant thing. Brilliant thing. What's the little thing which is brilliant?
Cheers. This is coffee. Yeah.
You know, I am going to talk about, we've already talked about glasses and cups.
Okay.
But I want to specifically talk about handles. Specifically having a big handle that you can touch without touching any parts of the cup itself. That's pretty useful.
To yes.
Keep a tiny bits of distance between your fingers and the main body of the cup or glass when you've got some hot tea going on there. I think that's pretty brilliant design.
It is, especially when this. Although this is close to the camera, it is that big. Actually, it's that big.
And Xate asks if they need to change their handle everywhere. I mean,
sorry. Could I ask, Will Cook for Board Games? Could you say what your name is again, please?
It's Xate, Xate. If you type
Xate, like
that,
and that's pronounced Xate.
Yes.
Okay. Good. I can cope with that. Mr. for Board Games.
No, they're not. Xate is she actually.
Oh, okay.
I just tried to not specify or Madame
Xate. Okay.
So Xate did a ceramics course this winter and made her own mug and I made it so the handle hugs my
Oh,
hand
that's
completely when I put my hand through. So like
that's
giant tang.
that's really good. Yeah, that's
That
good.
sounds awesome.
That does sound awesome.
Now
Sure.
let's. Oh,
Can I do my brilliant thing?
oh, sorry. We normally
No,
have, but can
can
we?
I do a
Can
brilliant
it
thing?
be
Is
a
that all right?
recent highlights or?
Yeah. My brilliant thing is sweet yellow courgette.
Okay, let's talk about recent highlights. Recent highlights. Yellow courgettes are a marvelous sight. Recent highlights.
Yeah, the sweet yellow courgette, which isn't a car, it's actually, a courgette thing. We've been growing courgettes in the garden, and Charlie mentioned a sweet yellow courgette this morning. It was her joke, it wasn't mine. Shame that we missed a trick. And we've been having these, they're really fresh out, literally pick them fresh from the garden, slice them up, stick them on the barbecue with steak burgers or sausages or whatever. Absolutely first class. Straight, literally eat them within 10 minutes, almost, of them being picked. It's absolutely fantastic.
Just raw.
No, stick them on a barbecue.
Okay.
Cooked.
Just like slightly toasted.
Yes. So that well, you can even have, well, depending on how you do it, slightly, you can have part of the outside can be slightly black, so you get that nice carbon flavour as well. And then the inside is just juicy and fresh. It's absolutely wonderful. On a hot July afternoon, like we've not been having recently. Yes, because it was Charlie's birthday on Sunday, so we had a socially distanced family barbecue with people around. It was really good. Yeah.
Did I wish Charlie happy birthday? I'm not sure I did. Well, happy birthday, Charlie, and
birthday, Charlie, from Bez. Happy birthday, Charlie.
I'm sorry,
in the wrong direction. I have to wave over there, which is counterintuitive because she's actually not over there. But never mind. Yeah,
and
that's a good
talks
idea.
about courgette fritters, or zucchini fritters, as the Americans might say, with lemon garlic yogurt sauce.
Lemon garlic yogurt sauce. That does sound good, actually.
I have two recent highlights. I'm actually going to pop up my share screen to show my own photographs, which includes a game. What have I been playing? What is its name? So, what have I been playing?
What have you been playing, Bess?
So, I've only been playing. Yesterday, I had a day of doing some amounts of work. I can't remember exactly what I did. I feel like I must have done something. Hopefully, I did something. And yeah, it was all about. This was the start of my day, charcoal toothpaste, and then having a bit of a walk with lovely flowers. This is near where I live, and just enjoying things. It's important to enjoy the sights. And then the thing I wanted to talk about was Energy Empire. This is a photo I took yesterday. Oh, have you played this?
Yes, I love that game. That's a really good game. Yes.
Yeah, I really like the way that you get these structures, and as the turns go on, you build more of an engine of what you're going to do. I did find that by 75% of the way through the game, it was fairly clear to me, okay, I'm going to just run this one loop on the green side as many times as possible. So I was just pushing the game towards an end, and it did feel kind of mean, because basically I could gain victory points, clear up all my things, and gain science to push my stuff onto the main board. And yeah, great game. As you can see, I did win by a fair margin.
I think the thing I like about Energy Empire is that it doesn't outstay its welcome. You make your engine and you run it a few times, but it doesn't. You don't have to play ad nauseam. It's focused. It's got a nice time. So there are some economic engine games which last a little bit too long, And although I have to say, I was reading some comments yesterday on Wingspan and other such things, and people were saying that most engine building games end about a turn before you really want them to.
I mean, that's
because it's
surely ideal.
It's ideal. It is ideal. I think it is, because you don't want. It's the process of building the engine that's really interesting and fun. And in a sense, once you've built it, yes, you need to be able to run it, but not too much. Otherwise, the person who's got the most efficient engine, regardless of how they built it, will win. So I like that. And Energy Empire, I think, is really a nice, sweet design. Good choices all through. Good strategic choices, and also some tactical bits and bobs as well. It's really good.
I do find the fact that so every time on the bottom right of this picture where it says energy times the rise as population soars, in between those things there's a lot of pollution markers. Every time you reclaim your people, either you put the pollution out or you discard the pollution from the game, which pushes towards the end of the game. Every time you buy a structure that adds a pollution to anywhere, you take something from there, which pushes towards the end of the game. So the end of the game is very much something that either people can push for, literally run an engine and then bring it back, skipping every second turn just to expedite the end of the game. Or you could indeed just focus on buying structures that have a bit of pollution, knowing that you will be able to clear them up on a future turn, again, to push for the end of the game. But it does have that, it's almost a double-edged sword, I would say, because it adds a really nice interaction. It means that if you've got a powerful engine, well, at that point, the game's going to fly forwards anyway, because you can push it towards an end, but it can also mean that one person could be caught short a little bit. Yes, it's possible.
Sate has mentioned Steamworks, which is another, the same kind of thing. I like Steamworks too. It's a lovely game. I haven't played enough Steamworks. We must get that out again.
I mean,
I do like Through the Ages as well, which is obviously another engine builder. But
I feel like at some point after we've done this whole history of war games, we should just start reviewing stuff on this thing, and kind of, especially when I've got my second camera and I can show the bits more properly. Because one interesting thing I would critique about this game is the duplicated cards, because with Wingspan and so again, looking at all these structure cards, which are things that you buy during the course of the game, which add stuff to do with Wingspan or terraforming Mars, it's all unique. So every time you're trying to build a different engine. But with this game, you're going to have there's a notion of how carefully do you have to balance that, but here it can be a little tiring when you see, one person got the work core, I can get the work core as well. I can get two of this thing. It feels a little bit boring, unexciting.
I didn't find that got in the way. So I think also there's that learning. I mean, well, if there's a disadvantage in terraforming Mars, it is that the fact that that everything is different. So learning it is much more difficult, because there can be cards until you've done several games of terraforming Mars. There'll be cards in there you've never seen before. You didn't even necessarily know were in there, which is quite tricky. Whereas with something like Steamworks or with Energy Engine, you can easily grasp what possibilities there are in there quite readily.
I guess it's kind of like speaking to the exploration joy of the game versus the mastery, if you know what I mean. Because I know Richard Garfield is very much pushing for the exploration, and for King of Tokyo, the design choice there was that, okay, I'm going to give you far more power-up cards than you'll ever use in a single game. So every game you're going to see a bunch of new things. And Richard Garfield even does a crazy thing. So I don't know if you've heard about the Richard Garfield house rule that Richard uses. So if they're playing any normal game, even with a standard deck of playing cards, they sort of shuffle two decks together and then they get rid of some of it.
Oh wow, that's an interesting thing to do. Yes,
So
I like that. That's quite fun. Yeah. Can we come back to that exploration thing in the wargaming, because that would be interesting, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. I have got this is my recent acquisition,
Oh
Quartermaster
yes.
General Quartermaster General version 2, though, second edition now.
Oh nice.
So that possibly shows that I'm a little bit too obsessed with that game than I should be, because now I've got first edition and second edition. But then the people who have played hundreds of games of Quartermaster General actually recommend second edition over the first, because it has got some changed cards in it. This is one of the games we were going to come on to later on as example war games.
Should we start with this, or would you prefer to go in the order we talked about?
I think we should go in the order we talked about. I think that's the other another divergence. The other game I've been playing a lot of recently is a game called No Retreat, which is a series of games, World War II hex and counter games. My friend Graham Tate, who's also a board game designer, he and I are going to play No Retreat Eastern Front online. So I've been learning the system by playing No Retreat, the Battle of France 1940 version. And in a way, it comes back to our exploration thing. Now, the No Retreat game is, although it's hex and counter, it's actually absolutely key to the game, all the games in that series, is the cards that you play. So the historical flavour, a lot of the historical flavour about things that might happen in your game is derived from the cards. So you'll play a card, for example, which will allow your panzers to break through an enemy line when they normally can't move from one zone of control hex to another zone of control hex. And there'll be a card you can play that can break that rule. Part of what the designer says in the No Retreat designer notes is that you really need to explore those cards and know what they are. So part of the simulation is an exploration of all the possibilities that he's provided you in that pack of cards. It also has got what they call plan cards in this game. So although you've got these tactical ones which you can use during the game, your operational plan is derived from one of 4 or 5 plan cards. Now, this is the Eastern Front version. That's good. So, for example, for France 1940, the Germans might not have the plan that they used historically. They might use one of their other plans, which did not involve attacking through the Ardennes. So, when you're the Allied player, the French and the British player, you don't actually know that the Allies are going to attack through the Ardennes. They may not. They may attack through the northern part of Belgium and attack straight along the Channel coast rather than attacking from the Ardennes. So part of the clever part of this design is that each of those plan cards has got 3 turns in which you will get victory points. Usually, it's in this game, it happens to be turns 3, 6, and 9. And the designer effectively bribes you to fall in line with that particular plan by saying, right, you're going to get victory points. So, for example, the French and British, if they're doing a historical plan, will get victory points for still being in Belgium. When really, if you're looking at it historically, you want to withdraw your forces out of Belgium, because if they stay in Belgium, they might get cut off. But if you do that, then you'll lose the victory points you would have got for being in Belgium. And that's quite a clever way of not forcing, but bribing a player to do what they might have done historically with that plan, even if it might be to their disadvantage. And I love that, because normally, 1940, the France 1940 campaign is a particularly difficult campaign to do a game for, because most people who've read about the World War II stuff know that what happens is the Germans attack through the Ardennes, they break through the French line across the Meuse, and they head straight for the Channel, and cut off the British and French, and hence the British and French have to withdraw and evacuate through Dunkirk. So people know that story. So, you know, if you're the Allies and you approach that game knowing that that's what could happen, you're going to take measures against that. So having a way of bribing the player by sort of giving them victory points for doing the historical thing is a really clever way of manipulating the player into that circumstance.
Yeah, I love the way that Gil-Hova turns it into little epithets almost, just saying it's all about incentivizing interesting behavior.
Yes, yes. The other great thing they have in this series, I know we're talking a lot about a series which isn't actually in my list of games to talk about, but anyway, is that you can change plans. So you might the Germans might start with Plan Gelb, which is the original Cthulhu Ardennes. If that fails, then they can change to a different plan and get points in a different way. Only in certain circumstances, obviously, but it does give you a little bit of flexibility. If your original plan goes horribly wrong, you can possibly change to a different one, which is nice. Yeah, it's worth exploring. And the designer does describe this game as a simulation rather than as an entertainment game. And in a way, I can sympathise with that, because it is allowing you to explore a lot of these might have beens of history, which is a standard thing that you might want to do for a simulation game rather than simply playing to win. So if I'm playing that game against somebody else, you know, as a two-player, I was playing it solitaire to learn it. If I'm playing it two-player, there will come a point, if we played it a few times, we'll just experiment. We'll just say, like, well, this turn I'm going to this game I'm going to do this particular plan and see if that works. So we're not playing to win, we're playing to explore the strategies that you might use and see what happens. Gain a little bit of insight, possibly, into what might have been.
And Xates makes the point that it's going to be ultimately a decision of what's worth more, the victory points for doing the historic thing or ignoring history and trying to win the war.
Yeah, yes, that is the thing. That is the major question. And fortunately, in World War II, the Germans were focusing more on not winning the war, seemingly, and more on their own particular weird strategic opinions.
So talking about this, yeah, it sounds like there is maybe a different mindset that you have to come to get the most out of these. And that's No Retreat by Coral Paradis, published by Banana Games, Gaga Games, and GMT Games. Yeah,
it's very good. The other interesting thing I found about this whole series is that the designer, he is very during the period this series has been produced, was very much in touch with the players, and would actually suggest rule changes. So the games are published, and then he'd suggest rule changes that you might want to try out, or rule changes that he was planning to incorporate in the next rule set. So that, you know, you're in a situation where, I think we talked about this previously, Bez, no game is actually finished, and in this case, the designers recognizing that the games aren't finished necessarily; they are they're works in progress, and there can be improvements as a result of player experience, which is great. We like that.
Yeah,
you have to have that mindset, though, that says the game as published can be varied. So although there's some players don't like that, some players like to say we play by exactly what the rules say and what the rules mean, rather than experiment with change.
Oh, and yeah, I think that's a really good point, that it's great to have house rules as long as you inform the player of the effects of these house rules. And it's lovely to hear from the other Alan Oughton, who's apparently listening whilst walking along the South Downs Way.
That sounds nice. I hope the weather's good. I mean, it's a bit cloudy here. I hope the weather's good for Alan.
So, yeah, let's get on with what is ostensibly the main topic of and moving on from No Retreat, I don't know how I would pronounce the Russian text here, but yeah, what is your first object?
Right. The first object is a square tile from this game here, Lost Battles, which is a historical game. Simulation, historical simulation game. So my first object is this. Now, which is just a square tile. It's double-sided, so you can have different terrain. I mean, in a sense, what I wanted to just touch on is something I mentioned last time. I didn't go into it in a lot of detail. There are wargaming. There's two main strands of wargaming. There's what I call professional wargaming, which is wargaming aimed at training the military and people who are associated with the military. And there's entertainment, hobby gaming, like I primarily do. And the important difference between these two is the actual purpose of the game. So the purpose of a game for professional wargaming is either the education of military personnel and others associated with that, or potentially trying out plans, trying out new strategies, trying out in some cases even trying out new equipment or new ways of organizing the military units. Whereas the hobby game side is to do with entertainment. It's really giving people an idea of the historical side of things, if it's a historical game, or just having fun, which is great. Kate has asked if I have a military background. No, I don't have a military background myself. I studied war studies as a postgraduate qualification way back in 1979. So I've got some academic background in it, and I'm a keen military historian, although an amateur military historian. But no, I don't have a military background. I know a lot of people who have military backgrounds who are involved in wargaming. So, for example, our group in Frome in Somerset contains a lot of military or ex-military people. So there's quite a big injection of experienced military people in the games that I play. But back to Lost Battles. This game, Lost Battles, was designed by Professor Phil Sabin, who's recently retired, the Professor of War Studies at King's College London. And he produced this game partly as part of his academic work, looking at how ancient battles actually worked, and trying to fill in the gaps of sources that we have by extrapolating from information about battles we do have information on. So there are a lot of ancient battles where we have very, very limited information. There may be only 2 or 3 relatively short sources that we have, and very often the sources of ancient battles are written many, many years, sometimes hundreds of years after the events. So we haven't got a clear idea in a lot of cases of what actually happened. Sometimes even who won. We don't really know who actually won in some cases. So what Philip Sabin did was to design this game, Lost Battles, and using battles where we do have information, we can validate the game system, and then use that game system to play an experiment with battles where we don't have full information, and try to extrapolate then what might have happened, and have much higher probability, or a confirmation perhaps, of some of the information we do have about what might have happened from scarce sources. So it's an academic, to an extent, it's an academic exercise, and very, very useful. A very, very useful work for academic research. Now, I would say that a lot of academic historians don't agree with this approach, but I mean, I think it's an interesting, valid approach myself.
So the key notable thing here is the divergence approach that Phil Sabin took.
Yes, the key thing is that he's designed it for that purpose. This is a game which, well, it is fun to play anyway, I think personally, but that's not its main purpose. Its main purpose is that exploration of the what might have happened in historical battles. The game itself, the fact that it has squares, I think, is also interesting, because you can build up your battlefield. A lot of these ancient battlefields, you can see that they're just kind of almost clear terrain. So a lot of these ancient battlefields are just going to be flat plains, or some hills, maybe a river crossing. They're not actually going to have a huge amount of terrain usually on them, because in ancient battles, very often you've got lots of close packed foot soldiers who need relatively flat terrain to fight on.
Are there subdivisions on these large squares?
There are. Well, you put these squares. No, each of these squares will contain a number of troops. So you make your battlefield by basically putting these squares flat together and making a large, usually something like it could be a 5x4 5x4 array of squares, which might have a hill along one edge. They might have a river in the middle, depending on whether it's a river crossing or not. And then your troops will occupy an individual square. So and your troops will be spread out across individual squares. So I'm trying to find some interesting troops to show. The trouble is the pieces are quite small. So let's see if I can find here we go. Yeah, let's find some of these. So I don't know if you can actually, I'm not sure if you can actually see that. That's actually quite difficult to see. This is some Greek hoplites. It's very difficult. Just about see. That's a unit of Greek hoplites, and what you'd have is several of these in one of these individual squares. So you might have a whole bunch of these Greek hoplites. Just here we go. Just show them like that. You'd have them in this square here, and those would fight together in that square. And the interesting thing about this is that it's the orientation that matters. So facing them towards one side is what you have to do, because very often in ancient warfare it's the flanks which are very vulnerable, because you have lines of troops, and if you get round the end of a line and flank them, then because their formation is intended to fight towards the front, if you hit them in the side or the rear, they will find it very difficult to adapt to that. And so if you attack in the flanks, you get very big advantages in combat. So the squares, although nowadays it's more, a lot of games nowadays are hex based, the squares do enable that kind of tactical disposition. They clearly show flank attacks.
So with these squares, you just move from one square to another. It's not a measuring game.
No, it's not a measuring game at all. You just move from one square to another. If there's enemies in that opposing square, you have to attack them when you go in there. There are adjustments for all the different circumstances that might happen in ancient battles. So, for example, with hoplites are designed really to take on other hoplites, and particularly they are designed for thrashing hard into the opposing line. So hoplites get an advantage if they're first entering an enemy square. That's their charge, if you like. And if they're in there already, have already gone in there, subsequent turns they'll have slightly less effective attack. The Roman legionaries, because Roman legionaries are easy for the Romans to replace, they actually have higher value than most other troops. So they're actually worth more victory points in the game. So, and cavalry, there's cavalry. So I don't want to go into too much into the mechanics of this, but
hi to Paul, who's said hi.
Oh, hi, Paul.
But we've been focusing on Philip Sabin's game, and it sounds like it's really abstracting away the movement and
Yes,
focusing on other things. That was the key revolution almost of this game.
that's right. Yes, the key point about this game is that it represents the troops that you've got in a consistent way with relatively small differences that are going to be significant. So that there will be a difference between hoplites and Roman legionaries, and you're exploring those differences, and particularly exploring how they are used. How do you get to the flank of the enemy when the enemy can see what you're trying to do, and how quickly can you react? If you've got a hoplite line, it's very difficult to maneuver it. So you can explore those kind of tactics. How do you react to that threat to your flank with an army which is relatively inflexible? So, for example, putting cavalry on the flanks really helps, because it means your cavalry will protect your flanks from enemy infantry trying to outflank you. Those are the kinds of things that you're exploring with Lost Battles.
Move to the next one.
Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to get hold of. Let's move to the next one. Yeah.
Fighting formations?
Yes, right. Now, the object which I wanted to use here, Fighting Formations, which is this game, which is by the late Chad Jensen, who also designed several Euro games, such as Dominant Species. What I wanted to use as my object is dice, polyhedral dice. And in this particular case, you get a bag of dice. You get 2d6s, you get 2d8s, you can see a pattern emerging here, 2d10s, you get 2d12s, and you get 2d20s. Yeah, so polyhedral dice are not often used in war games. Mainly people will use, well, not in board war games anyway, d6s. Is what people tend to. Traditional dice, when you say dice to the non-gaming world, we generally mean d6s, as you all know. And of course, I'm not going to go into the history of dice in this, really, because there's a long history. Yes. Dice have been around for almost since the dawn of human history, really. But polyhedral dice only came in largely with Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s. That's what most people think. But if we look at the dawn of modern wargaming, we find that even back in the late 18th century and early 19th century, the von Reiswitz game. I will put this link here for people who want to put it in, and hopefully we put this into the chat. Von Reiswitz, a Prussian, designed a game. Well, there were two von Reiswitzes actually. There was father and son. They designed a game called Kriegsspiel, which is seen as kind of the forerunner of modern wargaming, particularly professional wargaming. And being Prussian officers, they were designing this. Originally, it was designed for the king, but it was rapidly grabbed hold of by the Prussian general staff in the 1820s, and they used it to train Prussian officers and aristocrats. Now, the interesting thing about this Kriegsspiel game is it actually used fancy dice. I think they were still D6s, but I haven't got copies, unfortunately. But they were larger affairs, and they actually had the combat results on each face of the dice. So they were the world's first what do you call bespoke custom D6s? Yes. And it must have been really, really complicated, because they actually wrote or engraved the combat results on each dice face. So special dice are not actually, as young as you'd think. But certainly in terms of the public consciousness, D20s and D8s and D10s, all these things are really come from Dungeons and Dragons. Right. So the great thing about these dice, I'm focusing on these ones, is how Chad Jensen had used these to varied combat. Now they are used as combat dice, which I suppose is a bit of a traditional thing in wargaming. So what would generally happen in board wargaming is you roll a d6 and you consult a combat results table. You cross-reference the odds ratio between the attacker and the defender, and it gives you a result. Typically it'll be a defender retreat, attacker retreat, defender eliminated, or even the notorious exchange, where the defender is removed and the attacker loses an equivalent combat strength in that battle. And that's the original combat results table. The other method of using dice, of course, as people will know, is what I generally call dice buckets. So you roll a shed load of dice, you might roll 20 dice in an attack, and every 6 is a hit or whatever. And maybe your opponent, the defender, rolls a number of dice to reflect armor, and every 6 cancels out one of those 6s, which was the hit on attack. So those are 2 easy ways of using dice in wargaming. What Chad Jensen's done here is he said, well, if you're looking at World War II tank v tank combat or World War II infantry v infantry combat, it's the circumstances of that particular firing that matter. So if I've got a tank and I'm firing at another tank, if there's a hedge in the way, then I may not be able to see the enemy tank clearly. If there's smoke, if somebody has used smoke to get in the way, I won't be able to see the tank clearly. So those factors normally would be adjustments to a combat results table. Now what Chad has done, he said, well, what we'll do is everybody starts with 2d10s. I can't remember actually. I've been on to debate them. I think it's 2d10s. It may be 2d8s. Everybody starts with 2d10s. That's your basic, in the open, medium range, normal range thing. If there's a hedge in the way, let's reflect the hedge by saying, well, the hedge is a hindrance. Let's say if you roll the 2d10s and you get either dice is a 2 or less, then you've hit the hedge instead, and the fire is cancelled. So if I roll these 2 dice and I get a 1 and an 8, although the 8 sounds good, but I've rolled a 1, so the hedge is in the way. There's a straight hindrance. You can also say maybe there's long range. Maybe there's a long range, and it's less a gun is less effective at long range. So instead of 2d10s, I'm rolling 2d8s. So the number I can get is going to be less. The potential number I get is less. So with the 2d10, my maximum is 20, and with my 2d8, the maximum is 16. And I'm adding the numbers together to see what the actual attack strength is. If it's a very, very long range, then maybe I only get to roll 2d6s instead of 2d10s. So I'm only going to, my maximum here is only 12, as opposed to 20 in the 2d10s. That's an easy way of reflecting range. And if I get really close up, say I'm in this particular case, I'm in the next hex, I'm adjacent, I might get 2d20s or 2d12s to roll. So my maximum then becomes either 40 or...
it feels like a weird way to do it. It's kind of maintaining that really flat distribution. I mean, I would have thought that a more easier way to do it, and arguably even a better way to do it, would be to say, well, if someone's right beside you, you roll 5d6, because then it's going to be, at least you're guaranteed to have a decent hit on them.
I think the important thing is we still want to have that. We still want to have that easy method of adding up the numbers. And the trouble with rolling 5d6 rather than 2d6 is you might actually get 5 6s. You might get a very, very large number, or you might just get 5 1s, which is, and the probabilities are not that. The probability in a whole game where you're rolling a lot of dice, the probability of getting multiple 6s is very high.
Sure, but if you're comparing 2d12s to 4d6, it is the more curved.
It is, yes, it is flatter. But I think this is a very neat and easy way. You always roll 2 dice and you add them together. It's a very neat way of reflecting that difference, and don't forget it's a potential difference. So if you're doing missile fire, which most of World War II is missile fire, it's that probability that's important. So there's still got to be a probability of getting a relatively bad number, because of friction in war. Your tank might have run out of ammunition. Your tank the gun might have jammed. All these things need to be reflected, even if you're really close up. And so anyway, that's my bit of fighting formations. The dice bit. There are other bits of fighting formations which are really very interesting parts of design, because Chad specialised in that kind of thing. So that's what I want. That's the objects I wanted to refer to in fighting formations.
I just find that's a really interesting thing to reflect upon the fact that that amount of frustration with the randomness, whilst as a gamer, that's something that, yeah, as I just said, it would frustrate me. It sounds like that is part of the tapestry that you really need to have in there for it to be what you would consider a genuine simulation.
Yes, I mean, just to pick up on that point, going back to Lost Battles very briefly, there is a view that those kind of classical period ancient battles weren't that fraught with chance. There was a view that the commanders at that time knew pretty much the kind of things that were going to happen, and there wasn't because there was not so much prevalence of missile weapons then. It was more using spears and swords and shields, so it's much more hand-to-hand combat. And there is an argument that there's less chance involved in that. So in Lost Battles, there's a variant that somebody produced, which was an interesting one, which you roll the dice, but that counts against a total that you need to cause a casualty. So it's not the dice roll itself. If it's high, it causes a casualty. If it's low, you miss. The dice you roll adds up to a particular. It causes a casualty when you get to a specific total for that dice roll. So it flattens out that dice probability chance and gives you. Well, I know on average I'm going to do 3 attacks and I'll cause a casualty, rather than I happen to have got lucky and rolled 6 3 times, therefore I've caused 3 casualties. So I think that's quite an interesting way of flattening out and removing the lot of the luck from the game.
And enjoy your hedge warfare, Paul.
Oh, with his T-35, yes, okay.
So the next one was a game which is called Homo sapiens versus Neanderthals, which is not on BoardGameGeek, and we've got a little link that I've linked to in the comments where you wrote about it, Alan. Yes,
this is this was I regularly go to a conference of wargames, which is a conference of us older folks, mainly in fact miniatures wargamers rather than board wargames. But every one of these conference of wargames weekends, we have a kind of icebreaker game, and the object I wanted to use for this was this object here, which hopefully you can see it. There we go. This object here, which is in fact well, it's actually made of plastic. It's a bone, a femur, and the idea here is that this is the kind of weapon that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens might have used against each other if there was in fact combat between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. The interesting thing about this game, as I said, it was an icebreaker game. It's not a board game. It was played outside, and we had a whole bunch of Neanderthals. I think it was about 2/3 of the players were playing Neanderthals, and about 1/3 of us were playing Homo sapiens. Now, the beautiful thing about this game was that the Neanderthals were effectively defending themselves. They were only allowed to communicate by grunting. Okay, so their main thing had to be ugh. That was it. That was their words. Homo sapiens could properly use language So we, as the home team, we were able to make plans. Now, our objective was to, unfortunately, it's a bit of a genocidal game. It's not really what you want, but it was an experiment. So our objective was to capture the Neanderthal caves, if you like, the locations, and kill off all their youngsters and women and children and things, so that we could wipe them out. That's the Homo sapiens wiping out Neanderthals, was the kind of basic.
Wow, that's brutal.
Tenet, which was, yes, it was, yeah. And of course, there is absolutely no evidence that that is what actually happened historically. But the experiment we were making here was to see the importance of communications. Now, because Homo sapiens could use language, it meant that we could actually plan our attacks. So we could, for example, we could actually communicate amongst ourselves and say, right, this little group of us will do a feint of an attack at one of the locations where the Neanderthals had to be, while the rest of us waited until the Neanderthals reacted to that threat, and then we would attack somewhere else. Now, because we had extensive, good quality language, we could make these plans. We could actually discuss things that would happen in the future, and we could also do what if. So if they don't do this, we will then do that. So we could actually have multiple branches of our plans. Whereas all that the Neanderthals could do was argue at each other, and they could do hand gestures.
And point.
And point, yeah. So because of that sophistication of language, even though we had much fewer actual people involved, we were able to take advantage of that language really extensively, and you could easily demonstrate that we could easily win that kind of battle. So that, in a sense, that was to demonstrate the importance of communications, particularly in conflict situations. And doing it in that way was a very fun way of showing that particular individual point. And we were encouraged to bring our weapons along just for fun. So this is one of my favourite wargame pieces, in fact. So that was Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Communication is absolutely vital in warfare. It's the basic message.
And I think that here States is kind of taking it from the point of view, I imagine, of almost playing it as a party game style abnegation of not wanting to bother thinking about it too much, because maybe just that you get to UG, that you get to be a bit silly. I imagine that's what Xates is, the direction Xates is coming from. Because I can certainly see, obviously it's not a war game, but Yogi is all about kind of arbitrary constraints. And the reason why people sometimes get inebriated is because sometimes, lowering our own intelligence and lowering our own abilities to do things can be enjoyable in some fashion. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. I mean, I like the idea that games don't have to be cerebral. Obviously, some are and some aren't, and it can be. Yes, as Xavier said, it sounds like more fun to be in a Neanderthal, and they did have a lot of fun. That's very, very true.
But also, then talking about thinking fast, communicating on the fly with limitations, it's also strategic, maybe even more so.
Yes, that's true. I mean, you could imagine that Neanderthals would probably come up with ways in which they can anticipate, even collectively anticipate, what the Homo sapiens might try.
But the point remains that the communication is a significant tool, and even in talking about it, we all accept that yes, if you can't talk, that's a massive limitation.
Yes, it's also clear. I mean, I'm doing hand gestures, and we're looking at each other and whatever, and that does help with the communication, definitely. And that if we switch the video off, this would be a lot more boring, I think, because you wouldn't be able to see what our expressions, which would be very important, I think.
Like if right now, I mean, I don't know if you can see me, Alan.
I can't see you. No.
I can see you at the bottom of the screen.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So this is like just not as interesting. Whereas suddenly, if we remove it, it's like, okay, now I can look at you. I can think about myself. And yeah, I think this is really underscoring the power of communication in those. And I guess bringing it back to modern warfare, talking about the communication in, lines of communication, basically, to get from the front ranks to the people behind, and bringing it to non-military context, it does underscore the need for communication in every aspect of our lives, I would posit.
Absolutely. We are one of the abiding characteristics of humans is language, isn't it? And I think in some senses there can be an over focus on the actual words we use, on the actual nitty-gritty of the language itself. But there's also the visual cues that we take from each other all the time. And I think particularly in English, because in English we often don't say what we mean. We use irony a lot, and if you haven't got those visual clues, you can't necessarily pick up whether somebody is actually saying what they mean or saying the opposite of what they mean, knowing that you'll interpret it in the right way, all those kinds of things. Because we never misunderstand each other in English, ever.
Never. Okay, so the next object, I believe, is it from Quartermaster General?
Quartermaster General, yes. Quartermaster General. I think we may have done a little bit of this last week, actually. So I think I talked about this last week. You had the Blitzkrieg card from Quartermaster General, and this Quartermaster General is a game which, when I first saw it, I thought this cannot possibly work, because it's a card game of World War II. The whole of World War II, and each player has their own separate deck of cards. So each player has their own separate unique deck of cards, and you have a limited hand, and you play a card. You just play one card on your turn. That's it. That's all you do, and then you take a card at the end of your turn to refresh your hand. And this is really sparse. This is a very sparse map with big areas in it, and it's got some standard. These are some standard types of cards. You can build armies, you can build navies, you can have land battles and sea battles, etc. And there are lots of events which are historical, so you can do historical things in the game. But it's so you can play it in an hour. You can play World War II in an hour. But how the game plays out is not necessarily the kind of historical might have beens you can explore. But it's really the interaction of the cards, not only your own cards, but with the cards of your allies and the cards of your opponent, that actually creates the feel of the game. So you can have weird things can happen in Quartermaster General. Like, for example, the Italians can actually take India, which isn't something which really is remotely possible in World War II. There's no way in which the Italians could have reached India. But because of this broad brush approach, each of these areas can usually only have one piece in it, or at least pieces of only one side. So it's very coarse-grained, if you like. And my view when I first approached this was thinking, well, what if you don't get the cards you need? What if you don't get World Army cards and you're the Germans? What if the British don't get any navies? What happens? And it seemed so coarse-grained when I first looked at it that I thought, well, it's not going to work. But the cleverness of the design is how all these interconnected cards work together to create this experience, and that's the key thing. So I could have to go through all these cards with you, but I won't. It's that interconnectedness between the cards that I play as the German player versus what you do as the British player, that causes the game to work vaguely like World War II might have happened, and that's the key.
So was this one of the first card-driven war games?
No, not really. No, because I mean, Paths of Glory, which we mentioned in an earlier one, that came out in 1999. This is 2014, so this is 15 years later. But this is
Sure.
pretty much entirely driven. So everything comes from the cards here. Whereas with Paths of Glory, you start with a large number of pieces as well, and it's
so the point being,
cards.
even if
These
you
are
want
not
to move,
multifunction cards.
so if you want to move your troops, you have to play a card to move those troops.
That's right. Yes.
And what was the surprise? Because he's expressed pessimism over whether it would work or not. And what do you think is the key design choice that made it work?
Well, the surprise for me, I think, was the fact that the unique decks work and give you that kind of flavor of each nationality's approach to World War II. So, for example, the Russians have got lots and lots and lots of build army cards and lots of land battle cards, and although they do have, there is a Russian. You can build a Russian navy, which in the Baltic or whatever, but there's very few. So it's the different emphases in each individual deck that gives the flavor for a particular nationality. So, for example, the classic example is the Japanese. The Japanese, as we all know, the Japanese didn't enter the war until the end of 1941. Now, a lot of the Japanese cards are what is called response cards. And with the response cards, all you do is you play it from your hand and you play it face down on the table in front of you. You can't see what I'm doing there. I'm playing it face down in front of me. Nobody else knows what that is. Okay. This is a German example. That card will have on it a trigger. And then I can play it I can only play it when that trigger happens. So it's sitting down there in front of me. And a typical Japanese one might be, if you build a navy, you can immediately build another navy. So when I play a build navy card with the Japanese, I could immediately then play this response card, which says, right, I can now build another navy. So I immediately got the way of building much more forces than my opponents thought. Now, the other great thing is, because the Japanese have got loads of these response cards, you could have like 4 or 5 response cards in play. So you could have a response card which says, when I built a navy, I can build another navy. Then you can have another one which says, when I built a navy, I can build an army adjacent to the navy, or I can recruit an army adjacent to the navy, I should say more properly for various technical reasons. And you could then put an army in place, and then you could do a third card off it, and say, which might say, when you build an army, you automatically do a land battle in an adjacent area, which then enables you to take an enemy army off. So all from that first action of building a navy, you could chain these responses, and that's in a sense, that's how the Japanese did their major offensive at the start of
by coming out of nowhere and taking a long time to prepare.
And having lots of preparation and taking successive places one after the other without the opponents being able to react. So those are the kinds of things that that make each nationality, if you like, work. So for example, the reason I picked the Blitzkrieg card for the Germans is that Blitzkrieg says, use once per turn when you battle a land space, discard the top card of your draw deck and build an army in the space battled. Now, normally in Quartermaster General, you battle a land space, it takes an enemy army off that land space, leaving it empty. And then in the subsequent turn, you can then play a build army card, which allows you to put one of your own armies into that land space if it's still empty. What Blitzkrieg does is it says you can immediately build an army in the space that you've attacked, which reflects the German ability, that German ability to rapidly capture whole countries like France in one fell swoop. So it reflects that kind of Blitzkrieg approach. Yeah.
And
Yes. Yes. Sorry. The other thing I wanted to say, looking at Sate's comment there, this is a war game that appeals a lot to people who don't necessarily play war games. It's not particularly difficult to play, and it can take up to 6 players. You know, it's very, very good with 6 players. It's one of those games which is probably quicker to play with 6 than it is with a lesser player count, because each person is playing and focusing on their own country. And we have found a lot of times we play it with new players, new non-war gamers. When you finish the game, which might take an hour, they want to play it straight away again, because it's so much fun to explore how you use this. I've played the Germans. Now I want to play the British and see how the British work. So very frequently we'll have a session where we've played once and we'll immediately play again.
Certainly, it's something that has enticed me. It sounds vaguely. I mean, it sounds vaguely similar to something that's an idea that I had when I didn't know about Quartermaster General. But I love cards-driven things. I just find, just navigating these things, it's like, okay, these are my options. This is what I'm going to do with them. Okay, it's about the order in which I play. And having a deck that you start to learn and make your way through, I can definitely see a lot of joy. And I've got... That's your last object, is it?
That's my last object. Yeah, there's a couple of other games I referenced, but we don't.
But we've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, I want the questions.
So, firstly, one from about historic wars versus fantastical wars, and one about triangles. Let's start with the one about triangles, which is basically Alan Oughton asked if there are any war games that use triangles rather than hexes or point-to-point or squares.
I must admit, I'm not aware of any war games that use triangles. Nothing immediately comes to mind. Sounds like a good challenge, actually. I mean, there shouldn't really be any reason why you can't use a triangular grid. I suppose.
I mean, it feels like the traditional hexes are probably better for representing movement, and squares are probably more intuitive for non-gamers.
Well, that's the kind of received wisdom in a way. I quite like squares. I mean, going to squares. I mean, there's this game, one of the most recent new board war games by Dave Thompson and Trevor Benjamin, Undaunted Normandy. This uses squares, very much like Lost Battles. Again, like Lost Battles, you're building a grid with terrain on it, and your soldiers sit on those squares, and your movement is from square to square. Now, which means there's obviously, well, in this particular case, you don't move diagonally, you move orthogonally. So there's less distortion in terms of the movement, and it's on an individual, more or less on an individual soldier basis, ish. So there's a bit more to it.
Yeah.
But it uses squares, and the reason it uses squares is because those are much easier, as you have pointed out, they're much easier for the non-specialist wargamer to get the head around. People are much more familiar with squares than the old hexes. So that's a good reason for it. But then again, Lost Battles, I would say that Lost Battles is not an introductory wargame at all. It's definitely a game for wargaming specialists, and it's an academic tool. And that uses squares. But that uses squares for that particular reason, that what Phil Savin wanted to do is to reflect that the ancient battles which tend to be more linear. Of course, yes, there's another thing. Undaunted Normandy, although it uses squares, it uses offset squares. So you could argue that, yeah, it's got squares in it. But
if it's offset
like
squares,
hexes.
then yeah, they do operate like hexes.
Kind of, but yes, there's a picture of how you do the setup there. So it is using offset squares, but
I mean, you can move in the same 6 directions that you can move any hex.
Directions you can, yeah. So it is using offset squares. So technically, they're not exactly like a square grid, but it is actually, it's surprising. I find it quite surprising. It is very easy to understand. You're using relatively few. You've got relatively few squares there. I think it's easier to explain that with squares than it is with hexes.
Interesting. I mean, Alan Outson's just throwing in extra design challenges in case you want them. And Alan Outson, feel free to pursue this yourself. I mean, if this inspires anyone to work on anything, then great. Alex, it's lovely to see you. And yes, absolutely, you can simulate hexes with offset squares. We're just getting to the end of our wrap up. And whoops, I left that banner rolling. That was an mistake. We're just going through the audience question sorts of thing. And the last question, and I welcome any other questions from the audience, is from Xate, who says, what is the appeal to replaying historic wars versus just playing a fictional war? I mean, I know that this could be probably a hot button topic in Germany, and that's would be my question afterwards. But yeah, what's the appeal for you, and is that appeal?
Well, for me, it's because I have had a long-standing interest in history and military history specifically. So for me, it's just that. It's really I like exploring the history of it, and it gives me a sense of insight into what actually happened. And I like to think, although I know it's challengeable, that it can help to inform you about what might have happened in place of what actually did happen. And that which isn't necessarily a very historical question. There is a view that history is all about explaining what happened, and some historians and some military historians don't like the idea that you're exploring what ifs, because blatantly the what ifs didn't actually happen. But I like that. I like personally the idea that a war game gives you that opportunity to explore historically what might have happened. And certainly in modern professional wargaming, there was a strand of modern professional wargaming, of course, which is investigating what might happen in the future if we introduce a new armored vehicle or a new force structure. How does that change how we fight in the future? Those are all perfectly valid questions, and those are the kinds of things which von Muffling in the Prussian General Staff was looking at with the von Reiswitz Kriegsspiel, was looking at, we can experiment here with how we might fight in the future. Does this particular method of fighting work? Does this particular new force structure or new armored fighting vehicle or new aeroplane, does it actually work? It's the kind of thing that certainly certainly the Western powers are always looking at now. The Americans and the British and the other European allies are looking specifically at how different force structures work. So, for example, when we have a small force in Estonia now, if the Russians take actions against the Baltic states, what force structures and what logistical arrangements do we have to put into place in order to enable us to react appropriately to various scenarios that the Russians might try on us? So those kind of questions, which are key questions for defence, you can explore in the sandbox of a wargaming environment. And you can, the vital part of this type of professional wargaming is that you can make mistakes without it costing you in reality. So it's that ability to make mistakes and learn from those mistakes that this kind of futuristic professional wargaming allows you to do. So, for example, if you've got drone technologies, you can experiment with professional wargaming and how drone technologies might be used in the future. And if it doesn't work well in the wargame scenario, you can experiment with other methods. So that's the key thing. And you can also train officers to make their mistakes in the wargame rather than making their mistakes in reality. And that's the advantage of wargame. One of the advantages of wargame.
It sounds like ultimately it's about the intellectual curiosity of, okay, let's explore the what's if, as you say. Let's explore what might be. And I know we've had conversations in person that have lasted many hours that have been about, you know, the differences between a simulation and a model, and how pinpointing the what is wrong about the model can be very educational. I've got a couple of questions. Firstly, do you think that that appeal is international?
Ooh, the appeal of historical wargaming, do you mean?
Yes. As opposed to fictional wargaming. Because I know that, for example, in Germany, it's a hot button topic, isn't it? About depictions of Nazis and
wargaming is quite popular in Germany. I mean, and I think that there was a period immediately after the war where it was definitely not something which was happening. Certainly not in a large sense, but certainly that in both Japan and Germany, there has been less wargaming going on than in, say, the United States and here, as entertainment, if you like. And there are particular restrictions, as we know, particular restrictions in Germany on display of any Nazi iconography. But I think that is changing. That bit isn't changing, but there's certainly more interest in wargaming for entertainment. I think there's World War II has always been popular in, as a wargaming topic. It's been popular in the United States, and here in particular, I'm less familiar with how that was reflected in other European cultures, and certainly in Germany it was not heavily wargamed. Now I think things have changed, and as long as you're not breaking the law, which is displaying Nazi iconography, there is more wargaming now in Germany than there used to be. Certainly in terms of professional wargaming, it's a growing interest all over the world, including, I think, the Chinese do a lot of wargaming professionally. I'm not so sure about the entertainment industry side, but it's such a vast country, such a large population. There's bound to be wargaming groups in China as well.
I'm just kind of pondering. This is just a hypothesis. I don't think there's much way to prove or disprove this, but I wonder if there's a sense of glorification in the USA and the UK. I don't want to say jingoism, because not quite that, but certainly a sense of triumph, or indeed maybe, I wonder if it is because certainly within the UK and the USA, there's this sentiment of we were on the right side of World War II, and it's a celebration of the past almost. It sounds like a horror. There's lots of problematic things mixed in with this. I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think there has always been a strand of that jingoism, as you said. There has been a strand of that, I think, within American and British wargaming culture, but only a strand. I don't know how strong that is now. I think it's been sufficiently long time now since World War II that type of jingoism is less prevalent. I mean, a good book to read on this kind of thing is 1066 and all that. which is very perceptive in its admittedly caricaturing of historical understanding, but there definitely are strands of this kind of jingoism around. But I think most of the wargame groups that I meet within the UK and in America, they're quite sensitive to these kind of issues. But that's possibly because I'm mixing with more academic wargaming or professional wargaming groups, and I don't know as much about what you might term the kind of mainstream groups of wargamers. But I would say that most wargamers, certainly most wargamers that I know, have got a reasonable, serious interest in what happened historically. For example, when I do a lot of World War II wargaming, and I would acknowledge it's a good thing that we won World War II, and I would acknowledge the atrocities that were committed
Oh yes, I mean,
by our opponents, and we don't tend to portray the if we're playing SS units, we are not going to be portraying the shooting of prisoners and things like that within the war game, but we're not ignoring those issues. And a lot of us who have been involved in the research for these, we know a lot about what actually happened in these kind of situations, and we are sensitive to that. But it doesn't impinge directly on the kinds of things that we are trying to investigate in most of our war games. There are specific, if you like, dark wargaming scenarios that can be used to investigate why and how these things happened, but they can. I haven't done any of these myself, but you can, with sensitivity and creativity, investigate why these things might have happened. But those are more psychological studies than they are wargaming studies, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot to unravel, and Alex makes the point that, going back further, there are, problems with colonialism, but certainly the thing about colonialism is when it's Settlers of Catan, yes, that's kind of brushing over certain problematic parts of exploration of a new land and whatnot. With a war game, when it's a specific conflict, that's certainly slightly different. And I think that whether, the emotional issues kind of representation and whether these things should exist and in what amounts, I think that we're going to have to draw a line under for now, because we have already been going for 83 minutes.
There may be a whole big new show on this kind of ethics and psychological side of games, including war games. I mean, that's a whole big issue, which might be an interesting thing to discuss in some future date. You never know.
For sure. Let's us wrap up. People have had a decent amount of time to ask any questions, so let's finish off by asking, what are we looking forward to? What are your hopes and ambitions? It's now over to you in this next section. What are we looking forward to, and what are our hopes and ambitions? Do you want to go first, Alan? And I invite everyone in the audience to chime in.
Well, what I'm looking forward to in the immediate future is the fact that we've got copies now of the Ming Voyages and the March of Progress, our two Pocket Campaigns games. We actually have copies, and they are with Two Tomatoes and Frosted Games and with Spiral Galaxy, so they are, I think, just starting to wing their way out. In fact, I think the German copies may already have gone out. So our backers for Kickstarter should be getting their copies any day now, which will be fantastic. So those two games are here and going out. Yeah.
Congratulations on getting that done.
Hooray, there we go. They are real, genuine copies, which I've had for some while now, but
proper production copies.
Proper production copies, which is always a good thing. But so that's what I'm looking forward to, them actually going out. Hope and ambition. Well, I've been working for some while, thinking for some while about another World War II small tactical game, which I'm hoping will go in this size box. And I'm hoping, not necessarily expecting, to get some time to actually put something on paper, actually make some stuff which will flesh out some of those ideas. And I was going back to what we were talking about cards. I was trying to think, well, maybe this can be a card-driven tactical game, World War II in the Pocket Campaign series. That's hopefully my next project after I finished the current projects. The main one being Kingmaker, which is still going. So that's my hope and ambition, is to get this World War II Pocket Campaign game thing started properly, not just some thoughts in my head, but actually some things I can play with. That's me.
Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah. So I'm personally, let's see what people are looking forward to. Alex is looking forward to lunch. It's always good to have a nice, simple ambition. I'm personally, things that I am looking forward to, I like to have something that I'm, a small thing even, that I'm looking forward to today. I am actually looking forward to seeing KC from Nib Cards, which ties in, I guess, with things that I'm going to be doing soon. Tonight we're going to be playing Just Rhyme, which is a Nigerian party game, which I'm quite excited by. I mean, I'm not xenophilic to the point where I will say this game is better purely just because it's from a different country, but I think that there is value and in exploring the different things that people from different cultures come up with, if you know what I mean. And
you should put yourself back on screen, Bez.
Whoops, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. I was slightly distracted for a brief moment. So, yeah, that is something that I'm definitely looking forward to, just playing Just Rhyme. And also a bit more long term, I'm looking forward to Bez Day, which I keep talking about. Yes. But Bez Day is on the 31st July, 1st August, 2nd August. If you haven't already, let me actually copy paste this and paste this into the chat. So, yeah. So if you've not already entered, then please do share a photo of you either playing in a bind or yogi, or the free P&P cards that I supply, or it could be inspired by it. And I've already gotten, I'm excited to say, there's 5 entries so far, 3 of which are by the wonderful Xate. I'm going to say that. But we've got a couple of pictures from Andrew January, and one from Alex, and I think there was, there was actually, if Alex submits that, that'll be the 6th entry, and hopefully there will be more people to join in with that. I really should be better at sharing it on my mailing list and whatnot. That is what I'm hoping to do today, just to finish off a lot of marketing that frankly I should have done I feel I should have done like a month ago. But over the course, there is an L deck design competition that's already going. I'm not going to focus on that. If you want to check me out, it's stuffwithbez.com, twitter.com/stuffwithbez, instagram.com/stuffwithbez, twitch.tv/stuffwithbez, facebook.com/thingsbybez, stuffwithbez@gmail.com, and Alan Paull has some links which I will share there. If you want to read that out, Alan, or
best to get me at alan@surprisedecgame.co.uk.
there you go. Yeah, so
I'll see you on Friday. I'll see you on Friday, Bez.
Yes, you will indeed, because for the whole Bez Day thing, I'm just going to jump ahead to this section. So next streams, tonight we're playing just Rhyme and Formel. Tomorrow I'll be on my own, briefly introducing Bez Day, and I say briefly, it'll be a long ramble. Thursday, Calvin will be talking Grambling, and then we'll be playing Giftable in preparation for Bez Day, which will be unboxing in a bind in the morning, then starting off back again at 1 p.m, chatting, and 2 p.m. every single day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, UK time, we will be playing In a Bond. In a Bond being the economic subversion of In a Bind, and I am excited to have that. And
does that make it subversive?
You're subverting the expectations that you need to be dexterous, because only 3 or 4 people are going to be actually consorting. The rest of us are just going to be buying shares in these people and seeing what happens.
I'm looking forward to that a lot. It should be fun.
Yeah, Xate says that their entries are the funniest but not the best, and Xate also saw Alex's musical entry. That was amazing. I'm going to share that everywhere on Bez Day. Now, yeah, we've got people looking forward to tacos and to playtesting Alex's games Aqua's games without Aqua. Yeah, playtesting's always fun. Oh, I'm hoping to get the first, it's very incredibly low quality, but the first print and play edition of Categorical today.
Oh, right, good.
I'm going to be printing it and then I'm going to get Chris to print it and then stuff it into little sleeves for me. And then we'll play it with it tonight. And yeah, that is that. Yeah, to recap, we have been chatting not just about Ming Voyages, but about fighting formation, about the fact that there's lots of different dice in it and cool things like that. We've got games about talking or not talking, about the power of communication. We've got games that are completely card driven and war games that do all sorts of different things. And I want to thank everyone in the comments. I want to thank Xate, Alan Oughton, Paul Grogan, and Aquasulis for jumping in and saying hello. I want to thank everyone who's just watching and lurking. I also appreciate you all. I want to thank the people who took the photos that are on BGG and put up the license to say copying aloud, which meant that I could show them all, except for Alan Paull, who didn't notice that license, but Alan Paull told me verbally just before this that I could show the picture of Ming Voyages, because I mean it's your game and you're quite happy for people to do that. But yeah, thank you to those people, and most importantly, thank you, Alan, for being here. And hopefully it won't be too long. That's going to be my final hope, that at some point, maybe within the next year, we would be able to sit down, even if it's only 2 players, to play some Quartermaster General.
I would love to do that. That would be great. That would be really good. I just think playing anything, Bez. we should play. You should come round here, or we should go round to you, and we should play something.
It feels like within a few months it might be reasonable.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that a lot.
The last wrapping up. Oh, it's 12:34 apparently.
Wow.
Oh, only in Germany and other countries that share the same time zone. Please share, spread the word. These are the next streams. Share the word about Besday. And there is only one thing left to do, which is, as always, to say bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Do, do, do. Bye, 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 bye. This is the goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye.
Bye.